Okay, give me just a moment longer. And waboom. Welcome everyone. So, first of all, if you're watching this after the fact on, later on, don't forget to subscribe, bell icon, and say hello to Carlton. Anyway, any cubic photons, awesome. And yes, sometimes they can be, Kim. Unfortunately, mostly in the mediocre at best Piers Anthony Zant novels that I grew out of when I was 12. Anyway, today is a Patreon sculpt, and the patron for today wants a heart. But no, not both of you at the same time. Can I put you down? I'm putting you down. Today's patron wants a Harpy. And, there's any cajillion number of ways you can make a Harpy, so I'm going to have to talk to him, find out what exactly he wants. But, in general, the tough part for today will be the wings. I can almost guarantee it. The tail on top of that as well. And, of course, Shinju here sleeping right through it all. Pull that tail up from under. See that tail? She will grab it and hold onto the tip so that she doesn't expose that she's happy. Anyway, so one thing I did this week, I decided I was going to get. Oh, it's over here. Some actual mass-produced current miniatures. In this case, the Trollblade Scattergunners. Problem is, this is pretty much how they come. Whoop! And there goes a head flying. Yeah, just random stuff in a bag. Not even on a sprue, just in a bag. Random. Mix and match. And there is no way to tell which arms go on which bodies, except for an itty-bitty 1/4 scale image. 1/4 scale. I got one of them put together and I printed a base for it. Look at that. 1/4 scale picture. I mean, that's this guy right here. Look at that. How am I supposed to tell? Well, some of them you can see on the front. But not this guy. You have to sit there and fit and refit and try to figure out which arms go on which figure. Yeah, like I said, I took my Green Tide bases and enlarged them to 40 millimeter and printed out several of them to use for these guys because I wanted at least something that was a bit more unique. Almost look like coins. Yes. I have 3 gold coins for you. Yes. Meanwhile, I'm probably gonna get, at some point in the massively busy next couple of weeks, I'm gonna get all those glued together. Yay. In case you're wondering what this is well, they call it Instaset, but basically it's Zip Kicker. I'm gonna get them all eventually assembled, spray them, and paint them as a unit just because I want to paint something that I didn't make for the first time in 15 or 16 years, something like that. And this also, another thing this does, this gives me an idea on the level of detail currently for a lot of mass-produced miniatures from a major company. Because this is from Hordes, same people that make War Machine. And I can see what is and is not normally done as detail. For example, the buckle on the back of his head isn't a buckle, it's just a block. Whereas the ones on his thighs are actual buckles. And of course, the one near his shoulder is. I mean, come on. But things like, for part of the belt around his shoulder, for part of it, this one, not that one, for part of it, it's got a seam on each side. But for other parts of it, like right here, it doesn't. Like the modeler got a little bit lazy when he was making it. Tiny little pinhole holes at the bottom of his little waistcloth. Slightly bigger ones in the back cloth, but much larger wrinkles than I've been doing. Especially, I mean, this looks great, but there's only one major one, and then one that kind of blends in from the hang, and then a couple hang wrinkles. Not the extreme amount of wrinkling I've been putting in. The musculature looks less like musculature when you look really closely, and more like they actually just simply laid on the muscles and barely smoothed them together. There's a lot of, very blatant, this shape was laid directly on top of this shape areas. Now the wood looks really good. The wood on his little keg. And the leather and armor detailing has got some pretty nice detail. A bit better than what I normally would go for. The hands are actually bigger than my orcs. Let me go ahead and just grab up an orc. For comparative size, they end up about the same mass, but these guys are a little bit taller, and their hands are 3-fingered and a little bit bigger. And just ever so slightly bigger. The heads are smaller, but that's a stylization choice for this race. Yeah. But yeah, other than that, it's really not a huge thing. Some areas are more detailed, some areas are less, and I can understand why. Mostly it's to provide areas for the eyes to rest. And now, we're now waiting on the patron to get in here so we can start working on their Harpy. I should note, one of the things this set came with was a whole lot of spare pouches and a whole barrage of kegs, all glued on. So, one possibility is just to throw out there for whoever. I could add something on Thingiverse. Oh, big old demon yawn. Of a series of things to find on your belt. Pouches, potions, daggers, empty scabbards maybe to put on the back or belt. Because everyone's got their sword in hand, so where's their scabbard? And that probably helped the volume a little bit. I just noticed my microphone was pointing that way, not at me. Anyway, I wonder which cat that is. That's one of the cats. Anyway, so like I said, right now we're just waiting on our patron. Let me tilt this down a little bit. There we go. And when they get here, we'll get started. Because right now, it's... I can't even find the manufacturer. Right now, it's one of those cure your fingernail polish things. It's got about 1, 2, 3. Got about 35 or 40 LEDs in the top. And that's probably part of what... That, plus the fact that there's still some green resin, is probably why my clear resin is a little yellower. It's hard to tell from this red tinted light here. Oh look, it suddenly turned me blue. Find a good balance. There we go. There's a faint yellow tint to the clear. The problem with the gel nail UV lamp is it doesn't work for really big prints. I mean, this is probably the biggest print I had fit in that gel nail curer. And if I wanted to cure some of these other big guys up on this shelf, you know, like the other Cyclops here, the big guy here, even Grendel, it would not have fit. I had an older one that was kind of spotty, not in terms of curing, but in terms of recognizing there was something there to turn on for. Because it was a UV, it was a motion detector, but it had an open bottom, and I could just lift it up on like books on either side and stick a bigger thing under there for a little bit longer, rotate it, turn it on, rotate it, turn it on, rotate it, turn it on. But with this one I can't, because it's like a sandwich maker. It's got a reflective floor. And I have it sitting on a mirror tile, the kind that I use for my CR10. Okay, I'm going to poke my head over here and double check on Patreon that he got my message. Bing. And apparently not. Nope. Well, anyway, we can discuss a few more things. Another thing I find kind of questionable about these Trollkin is from a game design standpoint. I mean, yeah, I get that they're effectively Scotsmen. But from a game design standpoint, they can't decide what kind of Scotsman they want them to be. I mean, they're wearing effectively a great kilt over breeches and armor, but they're carrying guns in a fantasy, in a majority fantasy world, carrying guns. These are shotguns, by the way. Goggles, and carrying grenades. But their social structure is very tribal. And they've got full-scale trolls as their primary war beasts, so to speak. To the point where one of their units is literally a giant troll with one of these guys firing a Gatling gun off of its back in a fantasy world. If you want them to be tribal, make them tribal. Make them primitive in terms of technology. Make them a tight family structure. Make them a tight family structure. Give them a deeper ties to the lands that they're on, and less of a tie to some nebulous idea of a king off in a few hundred miles away. Make them tribal if they're going to be tribal. If they're going to be carrying Gatling guns and shotguns in a fantasy setting, number one, please no. Number two, don't make them the tribal ones. I mean, they're described in their own book as their lands are diminishing as the wars between the kingdoms between humans are getting closer and closer. That doesn't happen if you're the one with the guns. If you're the one with the guns, they don't encroach. They stay back. They don't want to get shot. In fact, you're more likely to encroach on them. So story-wise, I have problems with them. Sculpt-wise, they're brilliant. And for painting, oh yeah. I mean, they're supposed to be kind of blue-skinned. And the various images in their book range from almost as pale as, well, this new paint that I got. You can see that very faint pale blue. All the way down to a nice darker, like on the back of some of them. Oh, stand up. On the back of some of them, it can get as dark as this sucker. Well, this is a lot brighter than what it looks like. There, you can kind of see it. It's on the outside of the bottle, shows how dark. This is their deep blue from Army Painter. But when I do that, it makes it look a lot bluer. To give you an idea, this blue on camera looks about as bright as this blue does in person. And you can see the difference. Well, you kind of can. On the labels, you can see the difference. Anyway, those up. So they'd be fun to paint. Maybe make a little unit for the purposes of taking it to a painting competition, enter it in best unit or whatever, but not to actually play. Now, still have not heard from my patron. If he doesn't show, he's in Europe, if I remember correctly, which means the 8 o'clock show would not be a good time for him. So we'd have to delay until next week. Which actually, I think next week I've already got someone for the 1 o'clock show, so it would have to be the week after. Hello, Mark. You missed my complaining about the closest thing to instructions for these miniatures being a 1/4 size picture on the back of the box. And I'm not exaggerating about 1/4 size. It's from Hordes, aka War Machine, Hordes, War Mahordes, whatever you want to call it. And they're great sculpts, no instructions, and no two people's parts fit each other. And they come in a baggie, not on a sprue. I would much rather have had them come, say, each figure on a sprue. So I at least know, okay, this guy's arms fit together on him. Well, this is Hordes, the purely fantasy version of War Machine, no giant steam-powered robots. But I do not like... I love the sculpt quality, the actual detail level, the character. I mean, come on. This guy just looks like, the kind of sergeant in a World War II unit who's like, "Alright, boys, let's get going and toss him a grenade." You know? It's like a big burly, "Oh yeah, come on, boys. And when we get done, we got beer on our hips." It's the packaging design I have a problem with. Not the design of the box, the design of how it's sent. But I think these are resin cast, not plastic, so they don't actually have a sprue. I mean, it just feels a lot heavier. It feels heavier than its equivalent sized orc. Oh, they also have much larger bases. But, oh well. On top of that, the bases it actually came with, there it is. I took one of them out of the bag before I decided to make these. I mean, yeah, I just enlarged the orc bases to fit. The bases are like this. Very large, rounded edges, and a slotted base. Yes, this means that every time I assemble one of these, let me grab a random body. This, I think, is the body for the actual commander, but you actually have to slot a base him in a horse, whereas I prefer just clipping off that little peg and putting him on one of my bases. Anyway, you also missed me ranting about the the army concept. In a fantasy world, the tribal group, these guys, have guns. They're being encroached on by the wars of the nations to the outside them, but they've got guns, and they're being encroached on, and they're tribal. And hello, Carlton. Yeah, so there's a lot about Hordes and War Machine I'm not a huge fan of, and I'm ignoring the actual game rules. Okay? The game rules themselves, they're a little obtuse, but I'm sure that after playing it becomes pretty quick. But, do you mind? Yes. No, don't fall asleep down there. I said no, don't fall asleep. Wake up. Wake up, little buddy. Quit clawing my arm. Quit kneading. You're a very needy kitty, you know that. Hey, Buzzbutt. Buzzbutt. No, you can't go to sleep. Quit licking the inside of my arm. Yes, you hear the neighbors next door. Really. Carlton? It's like he's got perfect comedic timing. It's even funnier. All right now, Carlton, come on. Yes. Carlton. Carlton. No. Gotta put you down. Gotta put you on the floor, okay? Okay? I gotta put you on the floor. Alright. Now take care of yourself. I gave you plenty of time to the snuggle. Okay. Oh yes, so savage and feral. And there's this one, who's apparently a little jealous that I was doing that, as you can tell by her tail. I do this and her tail calms down. Yeah, good girl. Anyway, I stop and she starts flicking it again. So, we are going to be doing a Harpy. If he shows up. It's already 21 after, and we have not seen the new patron. And I need to ask questions about his Harpy. Like, does he want a full mythological Harpy where it's only chest and head of human and the rest is bird? Or does he want a humanoid with bird wing arms and bird legs? Or does he want a woman with bird wings and kind of sezzy and stuff like that? Well, if he doesn't show up, we can discuss game theory. And I don't mean mathematical game theory. I mean, like, how would you design a tabletop war game using Transformers? The last Patreon sculpt, let me dig it up. Let's see. Patreon minis, new. Okay, that would be the Tiefling Pally with the dual flaming swords. For those who don't remember, I'm going to go ahead and pull up a picture of her. Do, 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 do. This girl. This was the last Patreon sculpt that I did, and that was just a short time ago. It's Bear Bear. Can I show you Shinju? That's what you're saying? Hey, Shinju. Girl, come on. See, they're all so vicious. But I think she wants to get back on her bed. Go back to sleep. Let go. Let go. See, you made her mad at me. Shinju. Yeah, Dad, don't look away from me. Shinju, go back to sleep. So mean. No, not on camera. Anyway, so she's 13, by the way. The other two are 7. Yeah. This is not intended to be a show about my cats. This is intended to be a show about miniatures and sculpting them and using them in a battle. So anyway, let's say you wanted to pick a war game where you could have, well, let's say War from Cybertron Soundwave, and another down here that's about the same size. There we go. Classic Skywarp. So let's say you wanted to have a war game. You could have both of them on a battlefield. Well, the first thing you need to consider is what kinds of rules will you need? Obviously, you're going to need rules for movement, weaponry, and combat in general. Rules for morale, because there's always morale. I mean, how many times did you see the Decepticons go, Megatron has fallen! I am in command now! Pew pew pew! Retreat! Retreat! You know, not him, but Starscream off on the, you know. Anyway, so you'd have morale, and then you'd have to have some kind of a rule for transforming. Like, this version of Soundwave does not become a radio. He becomes a wheeled vehicle, as you can see here. And of course, Skywarp turns into a jet. So you'd have to have rules for covering how they transform. The next thing you would need to do is you would need to consider what things would be standard. And by that, I mean, what would be in everybody's profile? I mean, if you look at a Warhammer profile, at least old school, you've got weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength, toughness, wounds, initiative, attacks, leadership. And some versions also had one for movement. And the earliest versions, after leadership, had cool, intelligence, and willpower. The idea being that leadership was able to prevent you from breaking, cool protected you against fear, intelligence against tests against stupidity and certain types of magic, and willpower against other magics. I'm from the United States. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. Anyway, so you would need to figure out, first of all, also, before you even write those stats, you need to, do you want this to be a complex game where you've only got 2 or 3 figures on the board at a time? Or do you want it to be a really, really large-scale battle where, in addition to, you know, these 6-inch tall miniatures, figures, you've got humans, which, by the way, almost every single vehicular ground vehicle transformer is roughly I believe it's 1/38th scale. It's 1/32nd. Anyway, so let's say that the transform for the figure to actually transform, you actually have to transform the figure. You take it, and then, you know, the usual, lift the wings up a little, pull down the legs, separate them, look down the feet. Now this has taken a while. Some figures are explicitly noted as being able to transform quicker than others. That doesn't always correspond to the actual transforming. Okay. I mean, this one is relatively simple and still taking a few minutes for me to transform. It's also, I'm transforming it from memory. It's also been so long, some of the parts have gotten a little stiff. Yeah, come on. Yeah, so some of these joints have gotten kind of stiff. Okay, if you want to make your Transformers move, your best bet is CGI. Come on. This thing is so stiff because it's been sitting for ages, for years and years, like 8 years. I mean, I can't even bend the elbow. There we go. And now this hand. See, there's a little nub right here. It's supposed to just pop right open, but it doesn't because this is so old it's gotten stiff. Okay, there we go. So, in vehicle mode, it can do melee, obviously. Close combat. It can't in its vehicle mode, except unless it wants to ram. It's probably not as fast in robot mode, but it still has access to its primary firepower. There are exceptions, like if he turns into a gun, it's his firepower that increases. So, what we need to figure out is, from creating this game, transforming would probably give a bonus to 1 or 2 stats and a penalty to 1, maybe. This particular version of Soundwave, I'm not going to bother transforming him for the same reasons I had problems before. This particular version is War from Cybertron Soundwave. And his alternate form basically looks like a minivan with a gun on top. But his big deal is, and always has been, opening up his chest for minions, which he can do in both modes. Since that's not part of his stats, it's not affected by his transform. He's obviously would be faster in his vehicle mode, and with less exposed structures, he's probably more durable. His firepower is not really affected because his gun is also found. Yes, I've seen that. Well, that's got to come later, because you've got to start off with what are the basic rules. So we know we're going to need something for movement speed. We know we're going to need something for offensive ability. We know we're going to need something for defensive ability. And a mechanism for explaining how transforming affects the figure. What does transforming do? We're also going to need something for morale. Well, if we're not going to have any humans anywhere near, then transforming is a standard part of everything. And it might even be part of the a code for your profile. If you're going to have human troops, get some little people down there, then we're going to need to have transform be a special rule for the Autobots and Decepticons. Put him back in here. Once you've decided what kinds of rules you need to determine the scale. In role-playing games and war games, it's vastly different. But to give you an idea on scale, let's say we want to have this war game work. Everything from down to little Cassetticons, all the way up to the 3-foot-tall, recently redesigned Fortress Maximus. Okay? Well, we're going to need a large range, because we're talking 2 inches, 36 inches. Um, and you assume that there's a proportionate increase in durability and endurance and possibly strength. In a role playing game, it depends on the game. Some games, like, no, Ralph, no. Some games, like Cyberpunk, reflexes is God stat. You. Anyway, in some games like Cyberpunk, reflexes is the God stat. If you do not have good reflexes, you literally are impaired in the game. On the other hand, in a game like some of you have probably never heard of this game, Aberrant, which was White Wolf's attempt at making a superhero game, if you didn't have some kind of armor, you would be insta-killed in one hit. And the odds of hitting were better than you thought. There are very few games out there that are balanced enough to enable both the Mighty Glacier and the Glass Cannon and to be in the same party without one being invalidated by it's just unplayable and the other being stomp all over everyone. Ralph, what do you prefer? Speed, stealth, power, or charisma? Ralph? Which do you prefer? Speed, strength, power, or charisma? Or endurance? Well, you're not answering me. I need an answer. Yes. What you can't tell is he's holding tight onto the back of the chair here because he knows that I'll be moving him off the back of the chair if he lets go enough. Well, again, it's rare for a game to be balanced enough for the multiple different styles of play to be viable without support. In Aberrant, you could not play a glass cannon or a martial artist without support. Because if that's my ear. Because if you got hit one time, you were dead with no way of surviving. Pop goes the blaster. Champions? Well, it was possible, but everyone tended to end up settling in with the same amount of damage and the same bonuses to hit with just different details and special effects. It's very hard. All three of them are. Yes. Come on. Come on. Yeah. Come on down. Did you get your foot caught? Yes, you did. That's why he's not reacting normally. There he goes. A little crazy. Yes. Come on down. Come on down. Hold on. I'm going to put you on the floor now, okay? They're so savage and feral, aren't they? Aren't you? Okay, get on down. Good boy. Only when this is on. If I don't have that camera on, they're just ignoring me. Anyway, so stat-wise, you need to have what's the most common stats. The simplest I've ever seen for a war game had offensive ability, defensive ability, movement, and morale. And that was all of the stats that every troop had. You'd get additional stats. For example, a flying creature might have a special notation to its flight. A creature with a ranged attack would have a notation for its ranged and its ranged offensive. The distance it can fire and the offensive strength. And beyond that, though, it was still offensive strength versus defensive strength. Roll, hit, good, bye. But if your range isn't wide enough, then you could end up having figures that are characters and troop types that are supposed to be vastly different being barely more than 1 point apart. Because when you've got, let's say, primitive or just street punks with a baseball bat in the same war game as 100-foot tall mecha armed with ship-killing weapons, and you've only got you're only using a 6-sided die for the differences. You're either going to get to a point where the baseball bat guy can never possibly hurt something, which is kind of realistic, or a point where, without even rolling, the big guy erases in the entire table from the little guys, which is kind of disheartening. My favorite weapon in a game, in a movie, in fiction, in reality, in medieval style, melee, ranged, theoretical. That's a very broad statement. I mean, in a purely fantasy world, in a purely sci-fi world, I mean, anything? I don't have one. I don't have a favorite weapon, because what weapon would be most effective entirely depends on what I'm going to be using it against. For example, if I was in 1605, I was walking down the street of Vienna, and somebody came up to me and started rapping his rapier on a buckler and started insulting me to challenge me to a duel, or to get me to challenge him to a duel. If I had a hand and a half war sword, I would be at a disadvantage, because while technically the blade length would be very similar, his blade is a lot thinner, a lot stiffer, and designed for thrusting. Go right through my cloth and my tender fleshy bits underneath. My hand and a half sword might do a whole lot of damage to him if I hit, but for the time it would take me to perform a given technique, he's thrust me several times. On the other hand, if that same guy met me on a field of battle where we were, part of a unit of troops against another unit of troops. I was wearing full harness with my war sword. He was wearing full harness with a rapier. He'd be poking me with that rapier, and he'd be hitting him steel and bend and just brrr, brrr. Come down, clunk him one to stun him, and then pop, pop to hit both sides of the gorget. In a science fiction world, am I shooting down a ship, blowing up a planet? Am I sniping someone from across the room, from across the city, or am I fighting someone in close quarters combat with, like shotgun and energy melee? I guess if I had to choose my favorite weapon, and this is again something that is explicitly described as a weapon. There we go. My favorite weapon of all. ZBrush has one of the most variable learning curves I've ever seen. I was literally sculpting in it minutes after opening it. But I've seen people who've been working with it for over a decade who are still barely able to get basic shapes. One of the things that helped me is, for me, it feels a lot like it does when I'm actually sculpting putty and clay, which I have a background in that. Second thing that really, really helps it, graphics tablet. This right here, compared to a mouse, the difference is like having a rattle can versus an airbrush. And as for the lantern core ring, well, this is my stylus holder. Anyway, the thing about ZBrush is that you can't come at it from any other angle than itself. It's different from Mudbox, it's different from Sculptress and all of the other sculpting programs. You've got to learn how it uses what it uses. And hello, Carlton. Oh. One thing I do that makes it a lot easier for me, with very rare exceptions, I don't make my basic geometry in ZBrush. I make it in like 3D Studio Max, or in the case of sculpting figures, I have a pre-rigged figure that I can pose and bring in. Bear, I'm a big comic fan. What I'm really big about, Transformers, but most of them are currently put up for storage. Yeah. Meanwhile, I need to get something to drink. But there's a saying that if you use a skill for 7 years, you can become a master. Because that's the point at which the body has fully integrated muscle memory. I doubt that, but I mean, there's aspects to ZBrush I am just discovering even now, and I've been using ZBrush for over 15 years, or almost 15 years. One of my favorite prints I've ever made. I used to draw a lot. Nowadays, when I have an artistic impulse, instead of drawing, I will sculpt in ZBrush. Which, again, it's a lot of the same techniques. You know, drawing from the shoulder for large strokes, and then for little bits here. Anyway, I have noticed that a lot of the same things you have to learn for 2D art you have to know for sculpting in ZBrush. I've actually got a couple of videos on anatomy, proportion, pose and dynamism. Usually with a time limit. Most of my shows are 2 hours long. So by starting from basically a maquette that's I've already posed and put a prop in, I can then, all right, I've got about, and now that takes me about 15 minutes, sometimes half an hour. I can then go in and, well, basically, pull out clothing, draw on detailing like, medallions, rings, hair and beard, further detail the face, do whatever I need to do, and just bring it out and turn it from a basic humanoid shape with a stick to a primitive tribal Neanderthal with animal skins, but still has a lion head and a stick. But I also don't like looking at something that is incredibly detailed from the point of view of when I see these miniatures, I think about painting them. If there's too many highly detailed surfaces, there's not enough surface to really show the painting. You end up just having a lot of color everywhere and shading that shows off, that lines it all, but no real shading, like going from the darker, redder shades here up through the slightly lighter and yellower shades here, and the more neutral and grayer shades here. Everyday items to help me sculpt? Not really. Not digitally. When I was sculpting in putty, good old green stuff putty, I used everything from paper clips to dental tools to the back end of a paintbrush to X-Acto knives, But sculpting digitally, I tend to go more for taking advantage of what the tool lets me do. If you look at some of my more recent videos, you'll see I've developed a technique for making things like scale armor and chain armor that involve making a duplicate of like the shirt, bringing it in, giving it a UV map, and then applying a texture of chainmail or scales to that. And then using that as a mask to extrude out, I've now got chainmail. On the other hand, this is something I use a lot. Not so much when I'm actually doing the sculpting, but when I'm trying to figure out why something does and does not work once it's printed. Let's go ahead and take this guy, for example. This is obviously a mech that I made and printed a little while back and then painted. It's actually a teal green. It's a greenish teal. It's not this bright blue. That's the whole problem with it. When I pull this back, yeah, you can see on this side it's a little bit more of the teal, a little bit less of the blue. Anyway, it printed pretty well. I wanted to make sure. It did have some areas that were a little weak. And so what I did is I then took that. I said, okay, here's the unpainted, cured version. Let's go ahead this antenna here barely made it. It is right at 1.5 millimeters, or no, 1.4 millimeters thick. So yeah, I know that it will work this tall and thin. It won't work well, and that's on resin. It'll probably be a lot thicker to work well on regular 3D printing. Where would you start when you want to learn to sculpt? Well, first things first would be just the same place that you would start when you want to learn to draw. And that's practice every day. Do some kind of sculpting every day. Whether it's just loading in a sphere and just playing with it and tweaking it, trying out to see what all of the tools do and what you can do with those tools, or brushes. Learning the basics on anatomy, on shape language, Bobo and Kiki shape language. Then there's always, of course, just practice. Doing sculpts of exact, my face exactly is not where you want to start. You want to start with something easier. Well, thank you. May I ask why you keep retracting your statements? All right, well, thank you. No, here. Yeah. My paints. Anyway, as for learning the program itself, the actual video tutorials on Pixelogic's site are a godsend because they explain what they're doing and why they're doing it, what possible keyboard shortcuts there may be. And like I said, it's not just what they're doing, but why they're doing it. I am working on the goblins, Sheldon. My goblins will be available very soon. I'll be sending the links to the people who have my Green Tide Kickstarter. It will also be available for sale at a higher price for those who didn't buy the Green Tide. It's on my Gumroad. My Gumroad is listed down there, isn't it? Yeah, my for sale files. I do not have my own game, but I have been working on designing one. In fact, it's what this guy is from. It is a 1/200 scale game. 1/200 scale. I got a Carlton. Do you mind? No, little buddy. I've already got work on it. I've already got a basic system down for it. And the idea is, in the year 2120, we've managed to develop what's called an Alcubierre drive. And so we send 20 probes to the closest known exoplanets. And they will be sending back hard copy data through another Alcubierre drive so we can see what we got. Because right now we can't quite build them large enough to send a manned mission yet. And the first 19 we get back exactly what we expected. Data, etc., etc., etc. Number 20 we get back and it's a message. And it basically boils down to, we thought we were alone. We wanted to be alone. We will be alone again. We are coming to destroy you. So the government's going to panic, and yeah, and they like, try to work together and make a unified world defense force. And meanwhile, there's like, doomsday cults forming over here, and there's like panic over here, and they're like, okay, calm down, people, we gotta work together. Well, one of those doomsday cults that went over this way ended up in Siberia. Had everything go just a little bit too right for what they were trying to do. And they ripped open a hole in reality, and things started coming through. Tentacles, eye stalks, mouths, colors, aspects, the things that should not be. Eldritch abominations, straight out of Lovecraft type stuff. Meanwhile, up in heaven, this one angel's looking down. He's like, "Hey, Gabe. Yeah, what you need, Mike? We haven't heard from the big guy in about 1,500 years. Yeah, I know what you mean. Looks like the humans are about to get squished. If those things don't get them, those guys on the way will. Yeah, too bad. Oh well. Hey, Gabe, give me a hand. Give me a horn. What you need my horn for? Just give it here. Here you go. Alright. Goes down the plane of Megiddo. Gates of heaven and the gates of hell open. So you have near future sci-fi humans. Angels. Demons. And eldritch abominations. With aliens on the way. In one massive brawl on Earth. And then various areas of the world stop answering. For example, no one can get through this barrier that has sprung up around Scandinavia. After about a year, it falls as the Norse gods lead Scandinavian troops in battle against demons and devils. No one else can get into Japan. Their barrier falls as Oni and Bakemono pour out to consume. Pretty much, yeah. This originally came about to an idea I had many years back for a real-time strategy. And the concept behind the real-time strategy game version was that it was just the four. The aliens were never going to make it. They're just a plot device. If the humans won, turns out this is all just a simulation being run by God. No, it was if the humans won, it was a test. They passed the test. They can go out to the stars with his blessing, and he retires. If the angels won, okay, it was Armageddon, and yeah, that's exactly how it happens in the books. Yeah, the books. If the demons won, it was just a simulation by God to see what would happen if he tweaked a couple variables. And if the things that should not be won, well, then it turned out that in that version, God and the devil were both literally just two tentacles from the same eldritch being going. Yeah. I'd rather not get character ideas. If I'm not doing a sculpt for a patron, getting character ideas can cause issues with copywriting. Specifically, the aliens were just a plot device. The aliens were never going to be able to make it there. They were going to blow off halfway there. Not for that version. For this version, well, yeah. But I mean, I even came up with the idea that, okay, the humans' advantage would be that every single one of their units has a ranged attack of some kind. The angels, every single one of their units, has, if not full flight, then at least a hopping ability, so they have exceptional mobility. Demons have the advantage of having both extremely cheap, really, really weak mass production troops they can swarm a field with, and extremely powerful, expensive individual hero types, but nothing in between. And then the things that should not be just kind of break the rules as they go. Like, there's one where the entire unit is actually the exponential manifestation of a single figure. It's like if our 10 fingers poked through a two-dimensional plane, they'd see 10 creatures that could just teleport, seemingly teleport. There's another one that just its presence causes humans to go insane because it warps the way time is supposed to work within our neurons, etc. Giant hornets. That's actually very close to an actual creature from demonology, medieval demonology. There was supposedly one of the things that was down in hell was a horde of demon locusts the size of a horse, and they looked like hornets with scorpion tails and a locust head. Yep. So that's part of the hordes of hell. And yes, I use this every day. Who wouldn't? Yes, it would, but it wouldn't quite fit in with the concept of any of these forces. Um, we could go the techno-organic route with the aliens, which I don't like techno-organic aliens as having their own star drive because it breaks immersion. You need something that's a bit. You can't evolve star drive, not without deliberately choosing somehow to do it and being able to calculate the DNA involved. It's not something that would naturally evolve. It's something that would have to be forced into evolution. Anyway, it is 2:08. Okay. I don't think my patron ever showed up today, so there's no sculpting on this show today. We're going to keep talking, but I do have to put the what I got to do real quick for those who are in my patron, who are patrons of mine. Please note that I am in the middle of preparing to upload the Tiefling Paladin. If you are not part of my Patreon, one of the benefits for it is I have a file vault of all of my previous Patreon sculpts. This goes all the way back to when I first started my Patreon. Now, lately, there haven't been that many people actually scheduling their sculpts. So it's been a little. I haven't had a lot of additional figures recently. And I have them both in OBJ and STL formats. Another thing is, if you join my Patreon, you gain access to the Tarrasque. Now, I'm sure most of y'all know what the Tarrasque is, right? Okay, We don't even have an hour left. Um, we are literally we have it started well over an hour ago. We've been mostly just talking about sculpting and gaming and things like that. Um, hmm. What time zone are you in? And am I pronouncing Emmer correct? Turkey. So the 8 o'clock show tonight would be far too late for you. Well, next Sunday I've already got the 1 o'clock show lined up. Sunday after that for sculpting your harpy? Okay, I apologize. I think we may have gotten. The United States has daylight savings time, which means in the summer we push our clocks forward an hour for some crazy, insane, stupid reason. And it happened just within the past month, so people are still kind of off. Like, are we currently GMT -5 or GMT -6 here? I think right now we're GMT -6. -5. I don't know. But right now it's 2:11 p.m. or 14:11. So, yeah. Now, yeah, for farming. And right now, less than 2% of the population are farmers. There's discussion about making it law to keep daylight savings time year round. Okay. Okay. Are you on Greenwich time? It's okay. I can go ahead and get some of the questions out of the way that I had for you. And the first one and the biggest one is what style of harpy? Three major kinds of harpy. The first is basically a bird with a human head and maybe boobs. The second, and kind of the most common in most modern fantasy, humanoid torso, the arms become wings, and the legs are bird-like. And the third, which is kind of a bit more erotic, has a fully human torso and upper body with the hands just kind of turning into winglets and the feet being bird-like, but otherwise being a naked woman or a woman wearing a bra or something. And that's the single biggest question I have about your harpy. Do you want it to be monstrous or seductive? Okay, like the standard fantasy. Do you want it monstrous or seductive or kind of in between, where it's not evil, but it's not va-va-voom? Okay, so kind of ugly. The face kind of hooks forward almost like a beak. The breasts kind of sag into it, maybe have some feathers to cover up the naughty bits, whatever. It depends, Bear, because the original harpies were animals, literally. They had the minds of an animal. In a, they were just ugly, stinking birds with a human woman's head, and they represented horror and disgust. Whereas modern fantasy tends to portray them as a bit more like sirens. Sirens were also described as being avian women, but they were seductive. Yeah. Again, it's the influence of the classical depictions of sirens on the depiction of harpies. D&D does the middle ground. They're the humanoid with bird legs and arm wings, but they're also kind of ugly and vicious and mean. Not seductive at all. But sirens also originally were bird women that would sit on cliffs and sing. And it was bird song, effectively. But their bird song hypnotized. Follow me, oh, follow me. As opposed to the merfolk, who... Okay, there's this huge thing about merfolk most people don't even know. And the origin of it did not come from sailors or mythology. It came from theology. You see, there was a phrase, as above, so below. And it usually, theologically, it means, as in heaven, so on earth. But some theologists took it a bit farther than that and said, as on earth, so in the water. Meaning that below sea, underwater, there were fish people. And these fish people had monk fish, bishop fish, night fish, etc. And that's where merfolk came from. Mermaids got focused on because, hey, a maid is a beautiful young woman. So a beautiful young woman under the water would be a mermaid. And that became the thing that everyone saw when they went to sea, when they finally saw a dugong or a manatee. Yes, there were lionfish and tigerfish and elephant fish. Whales were sometimes called elephant fish. No, do you mind? Oh, yes. Ugh. They honestly believed this stuff too. Crazy. But yeah, so that's where merfolk came from. Also, the Kraken is not from Greek mythology. The Kraken is from Norse sailors in the 11th and 12th century when they first started reporting it. The infamous Clash of the Titans, release the Kraken! That's because they didn't have a name or description for the generic sea monster unleashed on Andromeda in the myth of Perseus. Also, can anyone in here tell me in what century and a possible decade the stories of the Chupacabra began? What century and a possible decade was the first Chupacabra story told? Anyone? Mark? El Chupacabra, the first story and the first sightings took place in the 1990s. Less than 30 years ago. It's not an ancient myth. It's not an old legend. It's a new urban legend that came about in the mid-1990s. I mean, it makes Bigfoot look ancient. Yeah, the most common one you see for all intents and purposes, in fact the oldest versions, sound like a coyote with mange. It's just that as the idea of something called a goat sucker hit the public consciousness, they mixed it with all sorts of things. Like, they mixed it with Momo. They mixed it with Sasquatch. I see someone just woke up finally. Hey. Buzzbutt, what you doing? Anyway. So it exploded. The same thing happened with a lot of other legends. The classic basilisk is a snake with a crowned head, whose gaze can kill. The D&D basilisk is a chubby, 8-legged monitor lizard whose gaze can petrify. There is a snake called the basilisk. And it's just a regular snake. It's just called that because it's got a couple horns on its snout. Basilisk? No. And basilisk is B-A-S-I, by the way. I've never heard of a basilisk. What is it from? Is it urban legend? Is it ancient? Is it from the Basque region? Alright, and I can do it right here. Google is your friend. Basilisk. Basilisk andrista. Okay, it's a creature covered with a big head covered in a goat skin, 2 small horns, a huge mouth, and glowing eyes from the southern Central Alps. It's also a movie currently in production, a brand of wine, and yeah. The ritual involved with it has strong similarities with the Bosanade, or Busanade, satirical performances of prose poetry or song, in which the storyteller, the bosun, denounced the misdeeds of the community. Known from the 16th century, these were once widespread throughout northern Italy and derived from purification rituals of New Year's Eve. Any link between the Basilisk of Andrista and the mythological basilisk is unclear. According to legend, the basilisk lives in the woods around the village of Andrista, Comune Sivo, and is supposed to annoy the community. Just annoy. Each year it is captured during the period of Epiphany, 5th and 6th January, and led on a rope into the village by musicians and masked characters, including Il Giovane, the young man, Ilvezio, the old man, Lavezia, the old woman, and the young signorina, who is bait for the animal's lust. There are also some old witches, shepherds, a hunchback. In the village square, the basilisk speech is read in which the animal gossips about the community. Once improvised and now written in advance, the speech reveals all the supposed sins and schemings of the community. During the speech, the hunchback bangs his stick rhythmically at intervals. Blah, blah, blah. Ritual. Yay. Yeah, let me go ahead and go back to Google and click on images. Okay, it looks like a Muppet. It looks like a big brown and tan Muppet. It also looks like a bottle of wine. Go figure. You would be amazed how many things like that, how many small little local things like that there are worldwide. Well, I mean, even the drawings I saw were a Muppet. A serpentine creature with a big old head, a big old flappy mouth, and the coloration of a guinea pig. Okay, it is 2:26. We got quite a bit of a random hodgepodge mess of stuff said today, so tonight I don't have a Patreon sculpt. So instead I'm going to start work on the ballista for the Anyway, like I was going to say, I'm going to worry about the ballista from the Orc Horde. So many of you may have seen last week I got the trebuchet finished, and if you want to see what it looks like, then let me go ahead and pop back over to here. Here is the trebuchet in its loaded pose. There is a log that can fit underneath it. And in its firing pose. And there is an orc spotter that can fit on that seat in front. Oh, he's over that way. And one of the pieces of ammunition is an unfortunate elf. Oh, someone help me! I don't want to get tossed by a trebuchet. Actually, that spoon is big enough to launch an elf. Actually, the spoon's big enough to launch a cow. Historical note, most of you probably know this. One of the primary uses of a trebuchet in warfare was not to knock down the walls of an enemy castle, but instead to launch diseased animals inside the fortress walls, causing them to hit and splash and spread disease throughout the whole citadel. Yeah, they did that. They would also use it to launch back captives, not expecting them to get caught and expecting them to go splat. So anyway, tonight will be a trebuchet. Well, not ballista. That was the trebuchet. It is now Yes, you did, Bear Bear. And I go by the screen name Valandar. I mean, the name's like in almost everything down there. Anyway, it is 2:30. I'm going to go ahead and call it an afternoon. And what I usually do when I log out is I will sit here and I'll stick my hand up over here. I will stick my hand up over here and I will count from 10 to 1. When I get to 1, I say something goofy or pithy or deep and then go. Now, because there is an inbuilt lag into YouTube, when I see my finger go, then I go ahead and I log out. That way I know I didn't leave anybody hanging. So, as a good night, it's going to be 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I once tried to write rules for Transformers for the old role-playing game Rifts. I wonder whatever happened to them.